Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Sorry for that. Just having some technical difficulties and problems with my camera, trying to make it work. Trying to make it focus. Focus is good. It's hard enough to be focused at this hour. My camera apparently is on my time zone, so there you go. But thank you for joining me. And today we've got a really new debate, actually, like brand spanking new. Um, it is a bit of a touchy subject. It is a bit of a something that you may want to sort of buckle down for. Um, the subject is very controversial, and I will start by putting my opinion forward that I definitely am not in favor of sort of violent actions against anybody, even places like Iran where they're suppressive. But on the other hand, they are a pretty brutal theocracy that is currently suppressing their citizens. So it's not a light subject. It's not something that um, is sort of our usual, well, check out this creationist kind of thing. The two people involved are both sort of have a history of lawyers. This is brand new. This went up probably about sort of just over 24 hours ago. It went up to YouTube. It is current, very current. So it's a debate that is being had right now. Now, just for sort of full clarification, I'm not a huge fan of Alan Dershowitz. I'm not a huge fan of him. I think that a lot of the stuff that he's done, he participated in the O.J. Simpson trial, in defense of O.J. Simpson. He participated in a number of trials that are kind of very dodgy, very dodgy. And I really think that Dershowitz has. I mean, he's not sort of morally bankrupt, but he's certainly worked for a lot of morally bankrupt people as a lawyer. Now, I know that sort of lawyers, they always say, "Hey, well, this person deserves representation." I get that, but when you end up working for people like O.J. Simpson, and I believe Epstein was the other one that he sort of worked for. He worked for Harvey Weinstein, kind of thing. It just is not, I don't know. I just don't like the man. I think that I think that his views, and he is very pro-Israel, and sort of is unapologetically so. So keep that in mind. I'm not a huge fan of him. Now, I haven't really heard of Glenn Greenwald. He apparently started out as an attorney. He works as a journalist, and he works as a author. So he isn't really a lawyer anymore. He was the one involved in Edward Snowden. He was contacted by Edward Snowden about the sort of documents that Edward Snowden wanted to drop, and he was sort of part of the sort of system that got documentary makers involved to drop that. And he's also testified that the US government has used sort of counterterrorism to spy on its own civilians, kind of thing. So he's very contentious. I think he is. I don't know. I don't know a lot about him. I've got to be honest. I've got to be honest. So Greenwald is a new one. But it's a very interesting debate, and I am looking forward to sharing it with you and maybe making some comments. Now, I don't know where I fall on this one. I really don't. I think things like this, I usually am an advocate for, hey, preemptive attacks on other nations are always wrong. You may think that is naive and you may need to have a preemptive attack. I don't know. I don't know. I really don't. But I would love to have a discussion about it. I really would, because I don't. It's very easy to say, hey, well, if we preemptively attack, we can do X, Y, and Z. It doesn't seem to work like that, as far as I'm concerned. I guess one of the big ones for me was Iraq, and I was out protesting over Iraq. That was sold to us under a lie, as far as I'm concerned. It was a terrible decision, and the only people that came out better off in the Iraq War is the military contractors for the US and military contractors in general, and the sort of black ops people that sort of made tons of money, and Halliburton with their rebuilding, and it's yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't support it, but I would like to see this debate, and let's watch it and find out what Alan Dershowitz got to say, what Glenn Greenwald has to say, and we will see if one of them can make a case.
So much. What a wonderful event. At a time when, as the moderator said, there are too few debates, too many bumper stickers, too many people cheering for one side or the other. Having a great debate about a really difficult subject is so important. Parts of me wishes this was not a debate.
Yeah, oh yes, of course. Yeah, sorry, Robin. Yeah, no, Robin, Ember had to do something, so it's just me alone by myself this time. So, debate dissection, yeah, that's solo, and that's okay. That's all right. It's not a big problem. Just there was some family stuff, and family took priority, as it should. Sound is too low. Okay, we can fix that. Oh wow. Okay, yeah, sound was way too low.
Wishes it was a discussion.
Oh, that's too loud. That's going to blow my eardrums out.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful event. At a time when, as the moderator said, there are too few debates, too many bumper stickers, too many people cheering for one side or the other. Having a great debate about a really difficult subject is so important. Parts of me wishes this was not a debate, wishes it was a discussion, because there are arguments on both sides of this, very, very compelling arguments on both sides of this. It's a very, very difficult question. Anytime a decision is made to take
I don't disagree with him. There's too few actual discussions about that, and just yelling at one side or another. This is the thing. When you don't debate and you don't have discussions, and you instead just demonize one side or the other, or just shut them down, and I get why you would do that. It all it does is just get people to double down on their position, and so I think more debates have to be had. But the problem is that these debates are being used just as as to quote one person, blood sport. Basically, they're just there to create intelligent debate is what we need, not just debate as in YouTube entertainment. And at a certain point, we've sort of devalued our engagement into debate to antics and entertainment for our detriment, to be honest with you. That's what I think. Not and I'm guilty of it too. I've watched complete dumpster fires because they're dumpster fires. I'm not saying I'm any better, but it's devaluing the idea of a communication.
Preventive military action that involves cataclysmic consequences and considerations. And so I want to go over why I think the argument here favors taking such preventive military action, though I understand the consequences. We know the risks of taking preventive military action when it shouldn't have been taken.
I'm not sure that he does. I don't. So what he's talking about is a preemptive strike. The problem with that is that there's no counterfactual. You'll never know whether they were going to attack or not to attack. Um, it it it's absolutely ridiculous that the idea is you can preemptively attack somebody in order to stop them attacking when you didn't know if they'd attack in the first place. It's very strange to me. I get the reasoning behind it, but it kind of feels like, well, you're going to attack them, then they're going to, do something to you, and you go, well, see, they were going to do it anyway. Well, you don't know that. You've changed the course of events. Yeah.
You call those false positives. You can call them by whatever word you want to call them. But we know that that happened in Iraq when we went in thinking or believing or proclaiming or claiming that there was nuclear facilities, only to find out that there wasn't.
Well, it wasn't nuclear facilities. It was biological weapons, which is even scarier under some things. So I don't think that was nuclear, which is surprising that he doesn't remember that it was biological weapons that they claimed that he had, or chemical weapons. It wasn't weapons of mass destruction aren't necessarily nuclear weapons. I don't think anyone was claiming he had nuclear weapons. It was chemical and biological.
Very tragic events for so many people, civilians and military. And a lot has been written about false positives. A lot has been written about false decisions, poor decisions to take military intervention in a preventive way. But not enough has been written about or considered about the risks of not taking preventive action when preventive action is necessary and would save lives and would do a great deal of good in the world.
Well, yeah, okay, sure.
History provides lots of examples of failures to act when action might have prevented catastrophic harms. And
well, you don't know it would have prevented catastrophic harms. I'm not 100% sure he can determine that. He can sort of say, hey, I think it would have prevented catastrophic harms. I don't know, but see, the problem is that you don't know what the results would have been if you did attack, and it might have been a greater loss of life. We just don't know because there is no, I don't know.
I'm going to argue that this is one such situation. Perhaps the most telling example of the failure to act was the failure of Great Britain and France to enforce the Versailles Treaty by taking preventive military action to stop the military buildup of Germany following the First World War. A military attack on Germany in 1935 or 36, when its war machine was still weak, might have prevented the Second World War with its tens of millions of deaths. Joseph Goebbels, who was the obviously propaganda minister of the Nazi regime, wrote about this in his diaries. And I hope you'll pay very close attention to this one paragraph because it's so critical. Here's what he said.
Well, here's the thing. We're not in the same climate that World War II existed in. The only reason Germany could build up is because like if that had been today and we had taken sanctions out against Germany, like they still had access to all the iron they needed. Countries were still trading with them and trading iron, trading steel, trading all of these products that they needed to build that war machine. It wasn't like they were building it alone. Italy was providing with a whole load of resources. Hell, even the USSR was providing them with a hell of a lot of resources. The USSR being Russia before they stopped being communist, or stopped being the communist apparently nation that they were. But if that example existed now, like we can take out national sanctions. World War II was a catalyst, and it was a terrible thing. It was absolutely terrible. But preemptively attacking a nation, would that have worked? If you suppressed the people of Germany, would they have stayed suppressed? What would have happened? We just don't know.
1933, a French premier ought to have said, and if I had been the French premier, I would have said, this is Goebbels talking, the new Reich Chancellor is the man who wrote Mein Kampf, which says this and that. The man cannot be tolerated in our vicinity. Either he disappears or we march. But they didn't do it. They let us slip through the risky zone, and we were able to sail around the dangerous reefs. And when we were done and well armed, better than they, he then says they started the war. Of course, Germany started the war, but the point is still the same. The rest we know is tragic history. Germany built up its armed forces without countermeasures by its intended enemies and conquered most of Western Europe, killing tens of millions of people. Most of these deaths could almost certainly have been prevented had Great Britain and France engaged in preventive military action before Germany became well armed. But at that moment in history, when Great Britain and France could have prevented the horrendous harm known ultimately caused by Nazi Germany, there was no way of knowing in advance, predicting the extent of what Hitler will do. History is blind to the future. History.
Yes, that's right. Do we think that Iran is going to start a war? I don't think so. I think that Iran, it's very hard to say, because Sam Harris has sort of been a proponent of, hey, if they get a nuclear weapon, they're going to strike. I'm not so sure they would, but having said that, Obama did an amazing deal where he basically lifted sanctions on Iran in exchange for not developing nuclear weapons, and that seemed to be working very well. So I think there's other ways of doing it. I think there's other ways of carrying this out.
History only knows the past. Yes, he wrote Mein Kampf, but many conquerors, would-be conquerors, do not follow through on their threats. Recall Khrushchev's threat to bury the United States, yet he backed away from a nuclear confrontation over Cuba. There was no way of predicting with any degree of certainty that Hitler would personally turn his belligerent rhetoric into military invasions of Poland, the Soviet Union, and then, obviously, the Holocaust. As always, it was a question of cost-benefit probabilities. This was a classic case of a false negative, implicitly predicting that Hitler would not do what he in fact did, and failing to take actions in order to prevent it. If France and Great Britain had accurately predicted the actual harms, they would almost certainly have taken preventive action, even if the costs were high, because it would never have been nearly as high as it turned out to be in the absence of such action. But as I say, history is blind.
Yeah, but how do we tell? And does the possibility of armed conflict justify the deaths that a preemptive strike causes? I mean, it might, if you are saying, well, if it prevents, or it may prevent deaths on one side, like on my side, then the catastrophic deaths on the other side is valid, but they won't think so, right? That isn't something that they will share. That's a very, very sort of West-centric idea, that in order to preserve the West, any amount of suffering on the Middle Eastern side is worth the preventing suffering on the Western side. It sort of reminds me of US exceptionalism kind of thing. Well, we were protecting our citizens. Don't forget the Iraq War, the catalyst for that was 9/11. And I know that was a horrible and hideous and awful disaster and an awful thing to happen, an awful terrorist act, but it was only a few thousand people. That's the thing. It was not if you compare the invasion of Iraq to 9/11, one was responsible for the deaths of over 1 million people, and the other was a few thousand. And, I know this may be hard for you to hear, but one was worse, and that was the invasion of Iraq. Yeah, it's probably closer to 2 million, you're right, but conservative estimates have it at 1 point something million. I don't know. I don't know. And thanks, Pragmatic Crystal. I want to give a big shout out to you. Lots of love, and thank you so much for doing what you do. Robin, big shout out to you. I really appreciate you guys just being awesome as usual. How does Islam view end times? Well, it depends on the Islamic person. It really does, and how they view soteriology. So eschatology is the end times, like how it's all going to end, kind of thing. They have different views on that, but soteriology, there is a bunch of Islamic people who don't who believe that defending Islam will get them a place in heaven.
Great Britain and France decided to take preventive military actions in the mid-1930s and done so successfully. No one would ever know what was prevented. And Churchill, if he had been the prime minister in the middle 30s, and he would have predicted that Hitler would kill tens of millions of people unless he was stopped, he would have been attacked by the international community, by the world. He would have been disbelieved, even mocked, as Clement Attlee was mocked for taking military action against Egypt in 1956. Had Great Britain and France engaged in preventive military action that resulted in, say, the deaths of 10,000 Germans and 5,000 British and French soldiers and civilians, the leaders who undertook such a military adventure would have been condemned as war criminals, because no one would ever know how many deaths they prevented by the sacrifice of those 15,000 lives.
He does have a point. Like, he does have a point that sort of, you can sort of sit there and say, hey, you prevented a lot of deaths, kind of thing, and no one would ever know because you did prevent those deaths. I get that, but how do you tell? How do you tell that anything? Yeah.
Ignorance of the hypothetical future is often the reason for failure to act in the present. Had Great Britain and France acted, everyone would know about the 15,000 deaths that their actions caused, while no one would know about the tens of millions of lives their actions saved. We now talk about the tens of millions of deaths these leaders indirectly caused, or at least made possible, by not taking preventive military action, but we don't accuse them of actually causing these deaths, because inaction that directly lead to death is not generally blamed as much as actions that visibly produce a body count. That is the...
So I think that in this case, Dershowitz, he kind of is saying that the only way to stop Hitler was this military action, and I don't think that's necessarily true. The US was trading with Germany right up until World War II. So was England. England had Hitler in their parliament make a speech, I believe. I think that there was, I think that there was sort of this idea that, oh, he's a horrible, dictator, but he's yeah. So during the late 1930s, Britain exported considerable quantities of scrap metal to Nazi Germany. It proved embarrassing, and that the government tried to cover it up. Yeah, and they trade munitions with the Nazis during the time. Like, this is the thing. He's trying to say, hey, these two things are equivalent, and I don't think they are. I don't think they they are absolutely not. What, seriously, in the chat, there is no way that Trump is better for geopolitics than Biden. There is absolutely no way. Like, we're talking, Trump wants to disband NATO when you've got like Russia invading another country, and you're talking about disbanding NATO. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. And his ideas of Putin. He likes Putin. He likes how Putin runs his country, which is, considering that he has, in most likelihood, in my opinion, killed his opposition and killed journalists and things like that, is horrifying. There is no way, there is no scenario. Well, there's no scenario in which Trump is better for geopolitics than Biden. There's absolutely no way. Like, I don't know. I don't know what you've been talking about, but like, if you talk to the rest of the world, if you talk to people outside the US, what they like England hates Trump, Australia hates Trump, everybody hates Trump because he's like, when you've got allies and you're going, hey, America first, we don't care. You've got a problem there, right? That if people go, well, what about Australia? And your attitude is, well, I don't care about Australia. You're like, well, why do I care about you? Trump is tearing down these alliances that have been built up and like built up for years and years and years of mutual respect, right? So the problem there is that if Australia goes, well, fuck the US, we've got some US basism and US intelligence bases in our country that are so essential for monitoring. Like, Trump does not understand how essential it is to have allies around the world that do things for him that he doesn't know about, right? So we've got these US military bases for intelligence in Australia, and it has been debated, and I kind of go, well, it's worth it because we're fulfilling our obligation to America as an ally, right? We're fulfilling our end of that alliance by allowing them to have intelligence bases in our country. But if America starts saying, well, we don't see Australia doing, like, seriously, pull your head in. Like, this is what, yeah, I don't know how we're supposed to respond to, well, you don't matter. It's a bit weird.
The dilemma of invisible false positives in failing to take military action. A preventive attack would not have been cost-free, and it was not undertaken because the British and the French did not accurately predict and assess the cost of not acting. The result.
Well, that's an entirely other discussion, sure. And I do think that we do too much to pander to American warmongering and American basically what America wants, Australia will do without question, and that is another discussion to have. But think about your two statements, okay? And it's not orange man bad. That is not what we're saying. But when you're basically saying, hey, Australia panders too much to America, and then Trump saying America first. Do you see how those two things are in conflict? That Trump wanting everything to be about America and Australia following the lead of America, no matter what it does, without stepping down and saying, hey, this isn't right. That is two things in contradiction. That is a contradiction, though. I'm sorry, what? It just is.
Was catastrophic and preventable. I believe we're at that moment now. If the United States, with or without the support of Israel, or Israel with the support of the United States, were to take preventive military action to destroy Iran's capability of creating a nuclear arsenal, deaths would result. People would be killed. When Israel attacked the Osirak nuclear reactor in Iraq in the early 1980s, there were a few deaths, not very many, a few, and we're not sure.
Oh, just a few, hey. And here's the thing, you better hope it succeeds, because if you're striking to take out somebody's military capability and it doesn't work, this is the rhetoric in the 80s, right? So if you're unfamiliar, in the 80s, and it was a very scary time, not to go too deep into sort of generational analysis, but part of the reason why Gen X that I'm from is so sort of blasé about stuff is because there was this overwhelming nuclear threat. Like, basically in school, we were taught sort of what to do in a nuclear crisis kind of thing. Like, and it was not the days of the 50s where people were like, oh, duck and cover. It really was you're basically screwed if nuclear war breaks out. You're screwed. There's nothing you can really do. There's nothing. So the whole idea was mutually assured destruction. You're keeping nuclear war from breaking out by the idea that everyone will die, because you can't. If you launch nukes and they don't destroy your enemy, they're going to launch them back. At that point, whether or not they would have shot first is irrelevant, because they're going to shoot. This is the thing. I feel like Dershowitz is sort of saying, hey, we could strike and take out their operations and take out everything that they can. Great. What happens if you don't? Well, they're definitely going to strike then, aren't they? Sort of this whole idea of a preemptive strike to stop a war, I'm not sure it will actually work, because if that preemptive strike does not absolutely trash the opponent, then it's going to be war. And you're never going to know if that person was going to attack you or not.
What it could have prevented. We don't know what Saddam Hussein would have done had he had nuclear weapons. Again, this is clearly in the area of probabilities. But I believe, and I think many military analysts believe, that Iran would keep its promise. Remember, the former president of Iran, Rafsanjani, who was more liberal than the man who died this morning, and more willing to consider making peace. Rafsanjani stated back a few years ago that if Iran were to develop a nuclear arsenal and bomb Israel, it would be the end of Israel, because Israel is a one-bomb state. All that is needed is for one bomb, one nuclear bomb, to land in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, and that would be the end of.
Well, that's true, yes. But, I mean, a lot of people have dual citizenships for Israel. And that's not to say, I think that. So Israel was formed from the disparate Jewish people who had been sort of spread out around the world and came back to this area given by Britain after World War II to form Israel again. And it would be the end of that sort of city-state of Israel, yes, but it wouldn't be the end of Jewish people in general. Now, here's the thing. It's such a small area that it would be the end of Palestine as well. I mean, you could say that about any small country. It would be the end of the Gaza Strip, would be the end of Palestine. I don't know that that's a really good analysis. I really don't think so, because there's a lot of, a nuclear strike against let's take a really tiny country, Luxembourg, right? You said that, well, that's the end of Luxembourg. Well, yeah, it's a tiny, it's basically one city. Yeah, I don't know that that's a particularly good argument, because there's a lot of, and I understand that Israel is more threatened than Luxembourg. I get that. Don't get me wrong. But it's not like it will be the end for the Jewish people. And that's not to say that, hey, that's okay then. It's not okay. I get that. But I'm not sure this has got the weight that he's sort of saying, hey, the city-state can be taken out in one sort of nuclear weapon. Yeah, there's a lot of city-states around the world that is the case. I'm not sure that's a sort of a particularly strong point for his side.
Israel. And he said, and he was wrong about this, and I'll explain why in a minute, that Israel would retaliate and perhaps kill 10 million Muslims by bombing Tehran. But Rafsanjani said the trade-off would be worth it, because it would mean the end of the Jewish state and Islam would still survive. Can a nation that makes those kinds of claims and predictions be allowed to become nuclear armed? I believe not. And I believe that preventive action must be taken. Let me make another argument that will be very unpopular here tonight, but I'm going to make it. When Israel bombed the Iraqi nuclear reactor in Issarak, Begin was asked to explain why, Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister. And he said the reason is simple, because Israel cannot ever take deterrent action after the fact. What did he mean? What he said was that if Iraq were to bomb Israel, Israel would not retaliate by bombing Baghdad. And he said why? He said because Israeli pilots would refuse to drop nuclear bombs on a civilian area like Baghdad. And he said, therefore, Israel does not have the deterrent threat that other countries have. The United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs, obviously. Israel would not. And therefore, Israel, he said, had to use preventive action. And he wanted that to become a precedent for all future Israeli governments. We're talking about the United States now, but we're talking about the United States in combination, obviously, with Israel. Neither country could probably, or would country, would probably do it alone.
Well, I think that Israeli pilots would not drop, like, I don't see that as a particularly good, like, the Israeli Defense Forces are currently pushing into Gaza, and they're kind of, a lot of civilians are being taken out. I think that more of their problem is, like, the problem with nuclear weapons and sort of weapons that cause fallout isn't just the devastation that they cause, it's also the fallout, the nuclear fallout that, you know, if you're bombing somewhere close, you're probably going to be affected by it. So I'm not saying that hey, it's not because they don't want to kill civilians. What I'm saying is that they're kind of killing civilians right now. I mean, Israel's missiles are hitting hospitals and things. I don't think, like, they may have had a problem with it before. I'm not saying, like, he's quoting somebody from many years ago. I'm not saying that they didn't say that. I'm saying that the evidence seems to suggest that the evidence seems to suggest that they don't have a problem with hitting civilian targets now. Yeah, no, I hear you, Maya. I really do. I do hear you. I just like to have yeah, and you were courteous. Yeah, no, that's fair. I get you.
And so there are 4 issues, really, when one thinks about this decision. One is the righteousness of the decision. And I think the decision to bomb Iran's nuclear potential arsenal is a righteous decision. It's
okay. So anytime somebody starts talking about a righteous decision, I have problems. And like, this is the thing, when, like, he's not even saying, hey, we should bomb their nuclear arsenal. He's saying we should bomb their potential nuclear arsenal, which is, that is not, like, when you're saying that, it's like, well, they could develop weapons. Well, but they haven't. And here's the thing, like, this kind of talk, when you're saying, hey, we're going to bomb people, like, this kind of talk will lead to them escalating to get those weapons. It's kind of this real war hawk attitude that you're sort of like, well, they could get weapons, so we're going to attack them. Well, the first thing that the person doing is going to arm themselves, right? Why, if you're talking, hey, you know, this guy might pick up a gun, so I'm going to take a shot at him, the first thing he's going to do is pick up that gun. Like, why would they not do that in order to protect themselves? Like, if they hear, hey, you know, he hasn't picked up the gun, but he might, that will lead to exactly the thing that you're talking about.
The right thing to do. It will save lives based on cost-benefit analysis, particularly if it could be done with minimum civilian casualties, the way the Iraqi nuclear reactor and the Syrian nuclear reactor both were destroyed with minimum civilian casualties. The potential benefits considerably outweigh the potential risks.
Yeah, and they're nuclear reactors. Keep in mind that these are just nuclear reactors. They're not even nuclear weapons. That's the thing. Like, I don't know why he doesn't see that and pragmatic crystal, you're amazing. 21 May, over 37,000 people have been killed. Yeah, it's 105 journalists. And that humanitarian aid workers includes does include Americans, like US citizens as well. Because they hit that food truck which had American citizens working there. Like, this is and I believe Netanyahu has been put on a war crimes, like the international Covenant on Human Rights has issued a warrant for his arrest for war crimes because of his targeting of these institutions.
Having said that, the next is legality. Let me talk about legality. I would ask if it were a smaller audience for a Trivial Pursuit question, but I'll ask it and then answer it. What is the first country in modern history ever to attack another country's nuclear facilities in a preventive way? You might say the United States, and the answer will surprise you. The answer is Iran. Iran, in the early 1980s, bombed the Osirak nuclear reactor. Remember, Iran and Iraq were in a war together. And Iran bombed the Osirak nuclear reactor before Israel did. And it's one of the bases on which Israel made the decision that it could be done. And it damaged the facility, but it didn't put it out of business. Israel then put it out of business. So when one talks about legality, one talks about precedent, but one also talks about whether or not there's a casus belli, whether or not it would be proper for the United States or Israel to attack.
Okay, because casus belli means cause for belligerence. It means a right to war, basically. It's sort of it's an old Latin statement that stems from feudalism times, where in a lot of the Christian countries you had to have a casus belli in order to sort of go to war for your neighboring European people, which is sort of the fact that it's still being used is absolutely horrendous. But yeah, I mean, he's a lawyer. He's going to use legal terms. That's just what that one means.
The nuclear reactor in Iran? And the answer is clearly yes. Iran, we know, killed over 300 Marines in Beirut, Lebanon, back in the 1980s. That was a casus belli. The Argentinian Supreme Court just 2 weeks ago ruled that Iran was responsible for the murder of hundreds of Israelis in the Israeli embassy and the Israeli community center in Buenos Aires. Those were attacks by Iran against Israel. And of course, we know that Iran sent many, many rockets and missiles, to Israel just 2 or 3 weeks ago. All of them but one were repelled, but nonetheless, that was a casus belli. And so there is absolutely no doubt legally that Israel and the United States have the complete right to retaliate against what Iran has done. It doesn't have to base it even on prevention, although prevention is a strong basis for it.
Yeah, and this sort of ramp up, like, you can point to other stuff that is a casus belli for Iran, like, going back to the 80s with the sort of toppling of their regime. So Iran's complicated, and so here's the thing. Iran used to have a democratic government, right? It was a democratic government. It was democratically elected, and the US overthrew that democratically elected government in order to institute the Shah, which was a monarchy that had reigned in Iran until being ousted in favor of a democratic government. So the CIA overthrew, and you're absolutely right, PTF Wayne, the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government and installed the Shah and the monarchy, who was a brutal dictator. But the Shah was really friendly to no, Star Song, that's Iran, that's Persia, that's Iran. The Shah was in Iran. No, you're absolutely wrong. So installing the Shah, you had a lot of people run away from Iran. I know Iranian people I used to know a psychologist that was Iranian, whose family had fled the country when the Shah was installed from the democratic country. Then basically what happened was that the people overthrew the Shah because they were absolutely brutal. They were a brutal dictator, but they were very friendly towards the US. So they were overthrown and a theocracy was installed. The US is directly responsible for the events that got the Ayatollah in Iran in the first place. Directly responsible. And you could go back to them and say, well, Iran had a casus belli against the US. You could say, I mean, yeah, I mean, and Trump killed recently Qasem Soleimani, who was a Iranian general. So a US drone strike killed this general. When was that? Back in 2020. Back in 2020, it was a drone strike that the UN says was an illegal strike. Basically, that the US was not at war with Iran, and Trump killed an Iranian general, one of their highest generals. This isn't any kind of thing that we must take lightly. Imagine if an American general was killed by a drone strike in America. I don't know how you're supposed to say, well, we're not escalating the situation. It's yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. Hey, Sunflower, good to see you too. Long time no see, buddy. Yeah, I don't know how you say, well, Iran was just, this is the thing, this escalation of this conflict. The horrible thing is that during Obama's era, it was de-escalated. We lifted sanctions. The worldwide community lifted sanctions. Iran sort of got along with it, and that's not to say that they're a great and awesome country under theocracy that currently resides there. It's horrible, but killing one of their generals, they respond. They're now very belligerent. That is not the way to help them. It's absolutely horrible, and it's such a complex thing. But I think Dershowitz sort of saying, "Hey, we have casus belli against Iran. You better believe Iran has it against the US." Does that mean that war is inevitable and has to happen? No, of course not. That's been a series of decisions that has led us down this track, and there's no reason why we have to keep going down this track.
But it has the right to do it in a retaliatory way as well. And so we're now left with the likelihood of success.
Okay, so Qasem Soleimani wasn't attacking the US in any way, right? Like Trump killed him by a drone strike on a plane, and he was going to meet with Iraqi militiamen, and Trump was reportedly angry that the Iraqi militiamen had attacked a US embassy. Now, here's the problem. You can't just kill somebody for meeting the people you don't like. That's a problem. That's a problem. He may have been convincing them to say, hey, probably not a good idea to provoke these people. We don't know. It's horrible.
And the ramifications. I am not an expert on military action, so I can't really comment on the likelihood of a success. Israel and the United States would not undertake such an action unless it thought the likelihood of success was very high, And then we finally move to what is maybe one of the hardest questions, the ramifications. What would happen? The Middle East is aflame. It's aflame more this morning than it was last night with the death of the former president of Iran. We know that Iran has sworn to the destruction
Yeah, it is. It is. Like, nobody's saying that the place is not absolutely a mess. Like, it is a mess. Gotcha. Yeah, look, Wayne, I as I said, I started off this by saying I'm not a big fan of Dershowitz at all. I really am not. I think he's not a great guy. I don't know about Greenwald. I don't know what he's like. I do know that Greenwald was involved in Snowden's release of information about the NSA spying on its own citizens. So I have a bit more respect for him for that. Yeah. And hi, beheaded Kamikaze. Really good to see you.
Of Israel. Of course, it calls the United States the great Satan and Israel the small Satan. And so the ramifications are unpredictable, and the ramifications of inaction are unpredictable. And so I will not sit here and tell you that I am absolutely certain, that I am positive that it's the right action to take. I will tell you that based on what I know, and I've spoken to many of the leaders of both of our countries, that the risks of inaction in this case, the risks of Iran actually crossing the threshold and developing a nuclear arsenal is so much greater than the risks of North Korea or Pakistan or China or Russia having nuclear weapons. After all, Iran is the greatest transmitter of terrorism around the world. It has as its surrogates organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, which would never hesitate for one moment to use nuclear bombs against the United States and against Israel. So on balance, though I concede right away it's a close question, I am in favor of a surgical, strategic, military attack that was designed and could succeed in preventing Iran from crossing the threshold into developing a nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, I don't think that's a, sort of the whole idea that Iran, if Iran did give nuclear weapons to Hezbollah or the Hamas, America would stomp them into the ground. I don't think that, I don't think that they really want America to invade. I think they're scared. I think they're scared with good thought. This is the thing. Why amp up this scary rhetoric? Because if you don't have an enemy, if Iran isn't working against you, if you start talking like this, they're going to be.
Thank you.
So first of all, let me begin by thanking the Soho Forum and Reason Foundation for this debate. I agree with Professor Dershowitz and everybody else that we need a lot more debates like this, especially when we have so many people in our country who...
That's something I do agree with Dershowitz about. We need more, serious debate rather than, just people yelling at one another. I get that. And that's why I'm prepared to listen to Dershowitz, even though I don't like him at all. I don't like his career trajectory. I don't like the people he's defended. I don't like a lot of things about him, but I will listen to him because we need to have more debate rather than argument, in a way that can be heard, and we can dissect it and we can look at it and say, hey, sort of the history of humans has been hearing the other side, even though you don't like it.
Constantly want to sell Americans on the virtues of all kinds of exciting and very dangerous new wars. So I want to begin by saying that, unlike Professor Dershowitz, I don't actually think this is a very hard question. I don't think it's a very complex question. That's always what is said whenever it's time to sell a new war. Oh, there's such good arguments on both sides. We have to be very careful about analyzing them. It might be the case that if what we were really debating is this very pretty picture presented by the resolution that Professor Dershowitz just got done advocating, that, oh, all we're going to do is fly a few fighter jets over Iran and we're just going to do little pinpricks, very precise hit the bombs on their nuclear facilities, and that's all we're going to do. I would still ask, what is the benefit of that? The way in which countries proliferate nuclear weapons is through the know-how of their scientists, which you don't eliminate unless you want to kill them too. It's through persuading them, convincing them that they would be safer without nuclear weapons than with nuclear weapons.
Right. Yeah. So basically, absolutely. Unless you're taking out their minds behind it, they're nuclear scientists, and Iran has nuclear scientists. Like, they're not sort of a country that has no. They used to have universities and they used to have all of this forward-thinking technology until the US came in and toppled their democratically elected government. They're not a backwards nation of, I mean, I hate to use the thing. They're not the brown people that the US usually drops bombs on. They're not, and I agree with him. The idea about a precision strike is that what's it going to achieve in the long run, except to make that country take actions against you?
But the reality is that is not actually what we're discussing. That's the pretense of the war. Every war that we've been sold, from Vietnam to Iraq to the regime change wars of Libya and Syria to the war in Afghanistan, all have had pretext and pretenses to make them seem so much easier, so much more difficult, so much more deliberate and targeted than they really were. So let me just begin by saying,
right, absolutely. And think about things like Afghanistan and why they went into Afghanistan. Like, it was just to get what's his name? Oh God, I've had a mental blank. Bin Laden, Osama bin Laden. That was who, like, we went into Afghanistan to get. And it wasn't like, then they were sort of like, we'll change the regime, we'll make it a better thing, we'll just sweep through there. And a lot of countries have tried to sweep through Afghanistan. Right? Like, it was just, we're just going to sweep through, change the regime, install a friendly regime, and then, it'll be fine. And it never is like that. It never is. Yeah, thanks, Pandora's. Appreciate it.
What Professor Dershowitz is really advocating for, and I don't mean that I'm going to read into his soul and try and intuit his motives. I'm going to quote from Professor Dershowitz only 3 weeks ago, where he spoke on the extremely highly esteemed news outlet called Newsmax. And this is what he said he actually wants when it comes to Iran.
Newsmax? Is that highly esteemed? Was that a joke? Is Newsmax highly esteemed? I don't think it is. I don't think it is. Right.
Headline of the Newsmax article, and this is from April 14, 2024, barely 3 weeks ago. Dershowitz to Newsmax: Iran's attacks won't end without regime change. And the article says, attacks like those that unfolded Saturday against Israel from Iran will happen, quote, again and again. And wars in Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen will never end as long as the Ayatollahs remain in charge of Iran. So the only solution is regime change, Harvard Law professor emeritus Alan Dershowitz argued on Newsweek Sunday, quote. And is quoting Professor Dershowitz. He won't tell you this tonight because he wants to pretend he just wants a little limited pinprick of a bombing campaign, but this is actually what he wants in his own words. Quote, the only solution is regime change. There must be a change of regime and a return to an Iran which is democratic. 70% of Iranians want regime change, and 90% of Arab states, meaning the US-supported Arab dictators in the region, want regime change. He then went on to say regime change would be carried out through an attack by the United States, which would be aimed at Iran. And then he added, quote, I had dinner the other night with the Shah of Iran's son, the crown prince of Iran, the man who would turn Iran into a democracy if the people of Iran were allowed to vote and return the...
He had dinner. Okay, so just for clarification, I've skipped through this debate to see, where I should put the segments. Holy crap. So he's talking with the son of the Shah. Now, the Shah is the monarchist government that America replaced the democratically elected government with. So he's talking about putting the Shah back in charge, which is the events that directly led to the Ayatollahs taking over. This is crazy. This is, hey, let's do the same thing we did before, and it'll be better this time. Just for the record, the Shah does not want democracy in Iran. It doesn't. It wants there to be a monarchy, basically a totalitarian government that is run by a royal family. I guess a lot like the Saudi Arabian government, that the royal family basically runs everything.
Shah's family to the rule, but it's not going to happen if the United States does not do a regime change on Iran. So it's not that he just wants a regime change operation on Iran. He wants to reinstall the Shah of Iran's son in the name of spreading democracy and freedom to Iran, just like we did to Afghanistan, just like we did to Vietnam, just like we did to Iraq. And you see what happened there. This is exactly the same propaganda, the exact same mentality, the exact same interest at work. Now, just to remind you.
Right. So if the people of Iran do not support what you're doing, there is no way you can get a democracy, right? Democracy. Why is it that these people think that democracy is something that you can give to people? It has to come from the people itself. It has to. There is no other way it can come. You can't force democracy on people.
To say that I'm going to return democracy to Iran by reinstalling the regime of the Shah's family, of the Pahlavi regime and dynasty, is like saying, oh, I want to bring freedom and democracy to the world by making Mohammed bin Salman not just the head of Saudi Arabia, but of the entire world. The whole way that the Shah of Iran was installed in the first place was that the Iranians had a democratically elected government that the United States and the West didn't like because it was becoming too nationalistic. It was threatening to nationalize oil reserves. And
there's the big crux of the thing. It was threatening to nationalize oil reserves. What that means is that democratically elected country, right? So this is what happened in Iran. The democratically elected country basically said, well, we don't like you taking advantage of us through these companies, these oil companies, and we're going to nationalize oil. Now, what nationalize means is that you take a publicly traded company and put it back under the control of the government. That's what nationalization means. So they were trying to nationalize the oil industry. The US did not like this.
Use the proceeds for the benefit of the American people. The CIA overthrew that democratically elected government and planted one of the most brutal and savage dictators the world has ever seen, which is the Shah of Iran, who killed and murdered and put into prison every single dissident and ran that country with an iron fist until there was a revolution in 1979. That is what's really going on here. The reason people like Alan Dershowitz and the CIA in the West wanted to install the Shah and love the Shah and want to return the Shah into Iran isn't because they love democracy and want to spread democracy to the Middle East. It's because the Shah of Iran was a very close ally of Israel and a very close puppet, a very obedient puppet of the United States. And that is what this entire Middle East framework is about, is taking out the leaders who are democratically elected, making sure that the people of the Middle East have no say whatsoever by imposing dictators on those countries which we support and prop up, as we're doing in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Jordan.
Yeah, and don't forget that the people that I know that are Iranian, they didn't leave because of the their families. I mean, they're the children, they're the Australian children of the families that fled Iran. They didn't leave because there was a religious, the Ayatollahs took over Iran. They left because the Shah took over Iran. The Pahlavi family took over Iran, and they are brutal dictators. They had to flee when the people rose up against them. So Alan Dershowitz is talking about reinstalling a government that is a monarchy, like an imperial state, and thinking that that imperial state that has been shown to be brutal, authoritarian, and cracking down on anybody that disagrees with them, that they're going to give the people democracy. It is insane. It's insane.
They want to turn the Middle East into all of that, where there's nothing but puppets of the United States that are very subservient to Israel. That is the real image in his own words. He's saying, what I really want is regime change, and I want to reinstall the Shah of Iran into that country in order to spread democracy. Now, let me just make a couple of points about a couple of the propagandistic visions that Professor Dershowitz presented. The first one is he wants you to think that we're right around the corner from having another Hitler, another Nazi Germany, and therefore you should make all your decisions based on what we...
Well, like I said, I don't think the climate's the same. Like, as I pointed out, leading up to World War II, the Western countries were still trading scrap metal, steel, iron, ammunition. They were trading munitions with Germany. They were giving them ammunition. Like, that is not where we are at the moment. That is absolutely not where we are right now. The whole basis is that we have sanctions against Iran. It's incredibly difficult for them to build up any kind of military force, even a nuclear force. I don't think that we're in the same situation as, and it's important to remember. It's important to remember that the West, England in particular, was not only ignoring Germany, it was supporting them on their rise until they got too belligerent and they're like, whoops, we better sort of condemn this person. I don't think we're in the same situation as that. I think that that's sort of using the World War II and the horrific things that happened as an argument from emotion as to why we have to attack this nation state. And I don't think the two things are the same.
wish we would have done prior to the emergence of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. When I first stopped being a lawyer and began writing about politics in 2005, one of the very first things I noticed was how it seems like our pundit class, our policymaking class, our political class knows only one historical example. It's like they didn't learn anything about history except 1938, Neville Chamberlain, Winston Churchill, and the Nazis. And so everything they want you to believe always should be decided through the scope of the Nazis are coming, Hitler has returned. Now, there's a phrase in law, which I'm sure Professor Dershowitz at Harvard has taught his students, that says bad cases make bad law. In other words, if you're deciding everything based on some extreme case that's very uncommon, you're going to make very bad decisions for other cases that are more common. We have been told over the past 30 years that every single leader we want to go to war with is the new Hitler. We heard that about Saddam Hussein. We heard that about Ho Chi Minh. We heard that about...
I remember being in multiple protests about the Iraq War before it started, before they went in there. Now, just for your like, I'll just talk about my experience with it because I lived through it and I was protesting against it. We were told in Australia, at least, I'm pretty sure that the rhetoric was the same in America, but that Iraq was working with the religious extremists to try to bomb America, the religious terrorists, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Saddam was a horrible tyrant, an evil dictator, but he was secular and he did not like the sort of religion sort of, you know, taking people away from his power, and it threatened his power. That was a lie. We heard that Iraq had stockpiled weapons of mass destruction. I don't think Dershowitz is right. I don't think they were saying nuclear weapons over here. They were saying chemical and biological weapons. I'm not sure about nuclear. I don't think so. But we heard all of this, and a lot of it made no sense whatsoever. Aside from the fact that the reason why Saddam Hussein was in there was because the US put him there. Like, the US installed Saddam Hussein into that position. That's part of their meddling. He was very US friendly at one point, and a lot more, and they were responsible for him being there. The US sold him weapons. You know, like, they actually sold him chemical weapons. I don't think biological, but they sold him weapons. So, you know, I protest. There was so many protests, and that was so large, and we still attacked Iraq, and Australia's just as complicit as America in that. And it was all lies. It was all lies. That they had no weapons of mass destruction. Nobody had found weapons. They were having inspections. Really, at the end of the day, what it was that America, like, Iraq was being belligerent about their oil. That's it. Yeah, I you know. Yeah, I don't know, Robin, I love you. I don't think Saudi Arabia has nude beaches. If they do, link me it, please. Oh, not public. Well, I mean, I suppose we're talking about too. Do they have private beaches? Sure. I don't think public nudity is actually allowed in sort of Saudi Arabia. Like, public nudity is very, very antithetical. As far as I know, sort of public nudity is strictly prohibited. In all public spaces. I'm not sure, like, if they've got private beaches that you can do whatever you want in, that's a bit different than a nude beach. I'm sorry. We're talking about sort of public nudity kind of thing, which they're absolutely not allowed. Like, so we might be talking about two different things. You might be talking about private beaches where no one's allowed to go. I guess Correct. It wouldn't be a public nude beach if they were private. Yeah, no, I get you. I get you. But you know, the point is made. I get you. You got a link for me? That's 9 years ago. Okay. Let it be known that Robin is sending me some videos of TNA. Let it be known. No, I get you. I get you. I'm not sure that that's actually current, but yeah. And I'm not sure if that's a private beach or not. I'm really not sure, but you know, I think I've done more than a YouTube video. Why aren't comments allowed on this video? Probably they got a whole load of you know, nasty comments. Maybe there's a lot of people out there that don't like nudity and you know, Saudi Arabia to be sort of intertwined. Anyway, I'll get on with it. But no, you could be right, Robin. I definitely could be wrong, but I don't think they would allow it.
Assad, we heard that about Gaddafi. We hear now that about Hamas, and Hamas is worse than the Nazis and worse than ISIS. We've heard that about Muammar Ahmadinejad, who, if you probably don't remember, that Hitler, he was the one who left after serving 2 terms, which the Constitution required. This is the standard propagandistic framework they always tell you to scare you into thinking that the new Hitler is about to come, and therefore we have to take action. But what makes Hitler Hitler, what makes the Nazis Nazis, is that it was a singular evil, unlike things we've seen in history either before or since. And so to let our government or pundits or warmongers scare us all the time into believing that the new Hitler is coming, we're again facing Nazi Germany, is to make extremely bad decisions, always in favor of war, because of course, who wouldn't want to go kill Hitler before he became Hitler? And that's what they want you to think, but that's not actually what we're facing.
Yeah, I think there is a big difference between Hitler and all of these kind of, you know, nations. As I said, I think there's a big difference between the climate of what the world can do. That when you sanction a country nowadays, like it's sort of, they're sort of screwed as far as, you know, building up any kind of thing. You have to believe that they will construct some sort of nuclear device in secret and you know, use that to carry out an attack, because there's no way that that a country can build up like Germany did. I mean, even Germany couldn't have built up like Germany did without, you know, trading and having, you know, sort of trade and support from the countries around it and the major trade partners of the world. So I think it's yeah, I think it's a problem. Yeah, those people in that video. Well, be nice, Sunflower. It's a simple mistake. Yeah, no, that seems more likely, and those people do look South African rather than Saudi Arabian. Hey, Titan, good to see you. Good to see you.
Now, as far as the claim that, oh, well, we can't wait for proof because the only proof that we're going to have is when Iran finally gets the nuclear bomb, that should be very familiar to anybody above the age of 30, because that is what we were told before the Iraq War. When people like Condoleezza Rice were asked, well, where's the evidence of all these nuclear weapons that you say Saddam Hussein has? She said, we can't wait for the proof to be in the form of a smoke cloud, of a nuclear cloud over.
Yeah, Condoleezza Rice did say that. I remember that. We can't wait for the, you know, these weapons to be found in order to act, because the chances, if they do have one, of acting, and we saw what happened in Iraq. We saw what happened.
The United States. So that was what they were saying was, oh, we don't have any evidence that Iran has nuclear weapons. We don't have any evidence that they're going to use them, but we can't wait. We have to do preventive war, which was a brand new concept for Iraq that he now wants to bring back for Iran. Prior to the war in Iraq, there was no such thing as preventive war. There was preemptive war, meaning if a country was on the verge of attacking you, you had the right to attack them. Obviously, Iraq wasn't on the verge of attacking the United States in 2002 and 3.
No, Iraq had no capacity to attack the United States in any way, shape, or form. I mean, its best munitions were Scud missiles that would barely reach another country. Like there was at no point, no point Iraq could have had any kind of action against the United States. It just, yeah.
So they invented a new term called preventive war that allowed the United States to go into Iraq, one of the worst foreign policy disasters in the history of our country. And I would simply ask you whether you want to repeat that, because everything that he just got done saying is what we were told in 2002 and 2003, and so many other times as well, including in Syria and in Libya. Now, it's not just Professor Dershowitz who wants regime change in Iran. It's also the government of Israel. We have this amazing coincidence in our foreign policy over the last 20 years that we keep getting told that we, the United States and Americans, have to go to war just totally coincidentally against all of Israel's worst enemies. So we went to war against Saddam Hussein, who Israel hated so much that they actually worked with and armed the Iranians in their war against Iraq. We tried to pull.
Yeah, that is true. And, you know, the sort of, I mean, there was the Iran-Contra scandal, I believe it was, where the US armed dissidents of Iran. The whole idea that I think the whole idea that we can sort out, we can just sort out the Middle East by just involving ourselves more in what they're doing is just insane. Like, it's absolutely insane. So the Iran-Contra scandal was basically America sold weapons to Iran, who they had a trade embargo with at the time. So they basically armed people that they had said, you know, we're not going to trade with this person because they're horrible and evil. But under the table, they supplied arms to them because Iran was attacking certain people that they didn't like. You know, they didn't like Iraq, and Iran was at war with Iraq. They didn't like Hezbollah. Iran was at war with, you know, it was this sort of, well, we don't like them, but they're attacking people we don't like. But they violated their own embargo, which is crazy.
President Assad, Bashar al-Assad, out of Syria, who the Israelis saw as an extension of Iran. We ended up fighting on the same side as Al-Qaeda and ISIS to do so. We failed. We left that country in complete destruction. We were told that we have to remove Gaddafi in Libya, even though we had partnered with him for so long because he was one of the most pro-Palestinian voices in the region. We did actually remove Gaddafi from power, even though President Obama swore that the purpose of the war was simply to protect the people of Benghazi. It had nothing to do with regime change, and we got that leader out as well. So in 2021, according to the Times of Israel, it reported the following, quote, Defense Minister of Israel, Benny Gantz, and Mossad Chief David Barnera will push during their meetings this week in Washington with senior Biden administration officials for the United States to carry out a military strike on Iranian targets, Israel's three main TV news broadcasts reported Saturday night. So on some level, I would argue that just bombing Iran is not actually good for Israel's national security, but there is no world in which bombing Iran, which is what he wants our country to do, bomb Iran, having the United States bomb Iran, would actually benefit our national security as well. Now,
right, and that's aside from the question of would it be better for Iran. Like, you can't talk about precision strikes against another country and expect them to just go, well, there's this weird idea by people that, hey, if we bomb them and take out X, Y, and Z, they're going to respect us and they're going to work for us. And they, you know, no, all you're doing is making enemies at that point. I don't know why this whole, like, think about it. If Iran bombed something in America, it's not like you would go, oh, well, they're doing it for our benefit. No, that's not what you would think. Like, why these people don't think the Iranian people won't carry a grudge for this is completely beyond me. And part of the reason why these dictators stay in power, like the Ayatollahs in Iran, is because they tell the people America is coming for you. America's going to kill you. America is going to slaughter everybody, and we're the only ones that can protect you. And so the more we talk without sort of very blasé, in a blasé way about striking Iran or striking this country, the more that dictator can say, hey, they're even discussing it right now. They're going to do it.
Let me just remind you of all the different times over the past, say, 20 years that we have heard over and over everything about Iran that Professor Dershowitz is trying to scare you into believing that they're just about to get nuclear weapons. They're weeks away. They're months away. We have to go bomb them. This is not something that only began recently. In fact, we've been hearing this exact same thing for 20 years, and none of it ever came true. So you should decide tonight whether there's any reason after hearing this for 20 years, you're now suddenly willing to believe that Iran is on the verge of getting nuclear weapons to the point that we have to go start a new war with Iran.
Yeah, when we were hearing this back in the 80s, we heard this straight after Iraq. Like this during the 80s, 90s, 2000s. You know, the thing is that all of these strikes and taking out their generals and doing that hasn't worked. What did work was Obama's policy, which was, hey, we will lift embargoes, help Iran, help the people, get food to them in exchange for nuclear disarmament, like just using nuclear materials for their nuclear power plants and not for weapons, and agree to inspections. And that was working. That was working. It was working until Trump came along and destroyed the deal. Just destroyed it. Just basically said no. Which is why I don't get why anybody says that Trump is better for international relations around for geopolitics. Trump moved the embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The Israeli embassy, the US embassy in Israel, rather, I should say. You've got to understand the ramifications of that. You have got to understand what that says. It was US policy to always have the the US embassy for Israel in Tel Aviv, not Jerusalem, because that is a provocation and a signal to all of the Middle Eastern nations that Jerusalem belongs to Israel. You've got to understand how momentous that is for the people in the area. Yeah, sorry, Titan. It was about just over 24 hours ago, I believe. Yeah. So when I looked at it last night, it was a matter of hours since it had been posted. So I would say within the last, 48 to 72 hours, possibly. So very current, very current, very, very current.
Jeffrey Goldberg, who's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic.
But I'm just getting across that Trump did this and he didn't understand the area, didn't understand the ramifications. He didn't understand the chaos that caused in the area. It's incredible that anybody would say he's better for geopolitics. He wants to take down NATO as Russia is getting increasingly aggressive and is currently engaged in an aggressive war against Ukraine. He wants to centralize Israel in Jerusalem, which is just, it provokes so much aggression from the other Middle East. Like it is, Trump is so bad for geopolitics. His America First policy has allies questioning whether they should be allies with the US. So the way that the US has created its sort of dominance of the world has been through these allies, and they're now questioning. Like it's just, he is absolutely terrible for international relations. He is the worst thing for international relations.
Strong supporter of Israel, wrote a cover story for The Atlantic called The Point of No Return in 2010, where he told Americans it was more than 50% likely that the Israelis were about to go bomb Iran in the next 3 months because they didn't have more than months before Iran finally acquired a nuclear weapon. You can go all the way back to 2005, where NBC News reported the following. This is 2005, 20 years ago. Quote, Israel should take, quote, bold and courageous action against arch-foe Iran's nuclear program, similar to its 1981 strike on the main Iraqi reactor, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday. Israeli officials have said that unless stopped, Iran will achieve the know-how to build a bomb by March of next year. In 2010, Jeffrey Goldberg said, based on my conversations with Israeli decision makers, in Israel, we heard this as 9 months from June. In other words, March of 2011, that's all Israel has. If we assume that nothing changes in these estimates, this will mean we have to begin thinking about our next step beginning at the turn of the year. The New York Times in 2012, President Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel told the UN that Iran's capability to enrich uranium must be stopped before next spring or early summer, arguing that by the time the country will be in a position to make a short, undetectable sprint to manufacture nuclear weapons.
So this is all the instances of being told Iran's just about to create these nuclear weapons, and they haven't. They've been wrong. If we acted upon this, then they'd be wrong. I don't know Sampler. I don't know if he's, what his leanings are. The only thing I know him in connection to is he was one of he was the lawyer that Snowden contacted, or the journalist that Snowden contacted to help him release all of that information about the NSA spying on its own citizens. So I know that Snowden might be a contentious figure in the US. I think he actually is amazing. I think Snowden, yeah.
In 2015, CBS in 2018, BBC in 2019, all say exactly the same thing. Oh, we're only months away. We have for sure these intelligence photos with a big red arrow pointing at some random building that we have discovered is where Iran is about to proliferate their nuclear weapons. It's been happening over and over that you've been lied to for 20 years. Why would you suddenly believe it and support a new war against a country that's 3 times as large as Iraq, risking all of the major escalation and instability and huge war that we know will happen? Now, if you want Iran not to build a nuclear weapon, there is a very easy way to do that, which is to signal to them that the safest way for them to reintegrate into the international community is by agreeing not to build a nuclear weapon in exchange for having sanctions lifted. That was the Iran deal that President Obama did in 2015. And according to
2015. Thank you. The Iran, Obama made that deal, and it was. If you followed the events of the Middle East, it was a real light at the end. It was sort of like, yes, we can work with Iran. They are capable of being worked with, and it was a landmark day in the Middle East. I remember that, and it was like, yes, that was amazing, because they agreed and they were doing everything that we required them to do to be part of the international community.
Congressional Research Service in April of 2024, just a month ago, when he was telling Newsmax what he really wants is a regime change in Iran, they documented how during the entire Iran deal, when sanctions were lifted, Iran never took any steps to build a nuclear weapon beyond what they were allowed to do. They had everything open to inspectors. They were always doing exactly what that agreement called for. And it was only once that deal was terminated, which the Israelis and many Israel supporters in the United States urged President Trump to do, did we begin again hearing that they were close to nuclear weapons. The 1981
I'm not sure if it was sort of Israeli people that sort of demanded that they do that. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. I don't know why Trump canceled the Iran deal. I don't know why. I kind of just assumed it was because he was incredibly stupid, quite frankly. That was such a dumb decision. It did not make anybody safer canceling that Iran deal. I don't know how it would have made it safer.
That he cites often about when Israel bombed Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi reactor is the perfect example. Prior to 1981, there was almost no evidence Saddam Hussein had an active nuclear program. It was a very vague aspiration. What drove Iraq to try and get nuclear weapons was precisely the fact that Israel attacked them. That's the message we send to the world all the time. If you have nuclear weapons, if you're North Korea or if you're Pakistan, we won't mess with you. If you give up your nukes, though, the way Saddam Hussein did, or the way Gaddafi did, that is when you're vulnerable to regime change. We've created a world where the incentive is to get nuclear weapons through the kind of aggression and militarism that he advocates.
Right. So, and that has been something that I've heard before. For instance, America won't attack North Korea because it has nuclear weapons, kind of thing. I it's insane to me that you know, because the thing preventing the sort of and Greenwald's right, the thing preventing nuclear sort of strikes by America and them going in is nuclear weapons. Like, America doesn't do drone strikes against North Korea. Like, it doesn't do this kind of thing. And partially that's nuclear weapons, partially it's because they're backed by China, who's a lot bigger. But it's I see his point. I'm not sure 100%, but yeah, I really do see his point that if you're going to have a system where the only thing preventing a large country like America coming in and changing your government is to have nukes at the ready, then every single country that has a problem with the US is going to scramble for them. And that doesn't make our world a safer place. This idea of the Western countries like America and England and Australia and all of these countries dictating what freedom is and how other countries should have their government, it's got to stop. It has to stop, because every single time we have tried to implement it on others, it has failed, and failed catastrophically. Because Dershowitz isn't saying, hey, we've got to go into preventive Germany. He's saying, hey, we've got to put a government in that is friendly to us. I don't think that's the case.
To a Washington Post op-ed by defense official Colin Call, he said, and he cited several academic studies, that after the 1981 bombing by Israel in Iraq, quote, the Iraqi nuclear program increased from a program of 400 scientists and $400 million to one of 7,000 scientists and $10 billion. And this is what we've seen over and over, that when you, as the United States, say, we're going to rule the world by force, we're going to go bomb whoever we want, that sends the signal to the world that you better get nuclear weapons. That's the only protection against that. But when the United States cooperates with countries and reaches deals with countries and opens up those countries like we had with Iran, that is when the world becomes much safer. That is when you take away the incentive for countries to get nuclear weapons. Bombing Iran will have no effect on their nuclear capability. Maybe it'll set it back by a year or so. And then what are you going to do? Bomb them again? You're going to increase the incentive for them to get it. But what
so you're going to set them back, and they're going to try even harder, because if you're basically saying we cannot allow them to have nuclear weapons, we better bomb them before they do, they're going to see the only way to stop that is to get nuclear weapons. And so they'll scramble for it even harder. You are creating the circumstance for what you don't want.
I can guarantee you will happen is that exactly what we saw in Iraq. There will be destruction throughout the region. Even Tony Blair, one of the most vocal advocates of the war in Iraq, admitted that the main result of invading Iraq was to create instability and a vacuum of power in the region that gave rise to ISIS. And you can look at every study, including from the Brookings.
Yeah, absolutely. That is what the war in Iraq caused. That is what invading Iraq caused, because they implemented a secular democratic government in Iraq. The Iraqi people did not accept it. They thought that it was a puppet government installed by the US, probably because it was a puppet government installed by the US, and basically took steps to overthrow it, leading to a vacuum of power that allowed ISIS to take control. Like, this is not something that works. You can't force democracy on people. You can't do it. It doesn't work like that. It does not frigging work. And all the times we've tried to make that happen, it's never worked. Because if somebody comes into my country and says, hey, like, I'm going to shoot all your leaders and then give you democracy, it's ridiculous. You don't want that. You know, you don't want an external country coming in and doing that.
Institution from all kinds of think tanks that usually are not shy about supporting war. And what they will say, they will have a long list of horribles about the kind of infiltration and fire that will set out in the Middle East if we do something like try and a little pinprick on Iran. Even if that were in the most ideal world was our goal, that will not be the result. We saw what Iran did by Israel. He forgot to mention this when he was talking about Iran sending those missiles over to Israel. It was preceded by something that happened, which was Israel went to Syria and bombed a consulate of Iran, something that every country would react to that way. The more we attack countries in the Middle East,
I wasn't aware of that. So Israel bombed a Iranian embassy. Yeah, so Israel did an airstrike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, so in Syria. Oh, that's crazy. "16 people were killed, 8 officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, so they're military, and 2 Syrian civilians." Wow. Yeah, that's you know, that's the problem.
the more we destabilize the Middle East, the more death and destruction we bring with no benefit. The more we try and cooperate and bring a world of peace, the less threat of nuclear weapons you will find. Thank you.
Israel succeeded in its
Okay, so
attack.
this is the rebuttal period where they're rebutting kind of thing. So I really do want to hear the rebuttals by both speakers. Yeah.
Attacks on both the Iraqi and the Syrian nuclear reactors with minimal casualties, and neither Syria nor Iraq.
I don't like the way he's blasé saying like minimal casualties, but those casualties, especially if they're civilian casualties, they may be minimal as far as, oh, it could have been so much worse, but they're not minimal in the way that the people see them, right? They're not minimal as in, oh, well, they don't really matter kind of thing. I don't like the way that he's using this language. You know, collateral damage and minimal casualties. I've always disliked it. It's sort of these euphemisms have come up that we're not acknowledging what it is. Oh, it was only just, there was some collateral damage. No, civilians were killed. Like, you missed the target and civilians were killed. It's not collateral damage. It's not minimal casualties. It's really bad when you start talking like this, because, you know, I bet you $1,000 the people who were killed, their families didn't think it was minimal damage. I'll bet you that.
Has continued to develop nuclear weapons. The Middle East is a lot safer because of Israel's surgical attacks, careful attacks, very, very cautious attacks on both Iraq, and Syria's nuclear reactors. Now, I would love to see Israel be able to cooperate with Iran and work out a deal and try to avoid them getting nuclear weapons or a nuclear arsenal without an attack. That would be far, far better. But it's just not going to happen. And
it was happening. That's the thing. It was working. Yeah.
There are some very, very thoughtful people who now honestly believe that Iran is just months away from having a nuclear arsenal and enough bombs to destroy Israel. And of course, we know that Iran operates through surrogates. It operates through far less responsible organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and others. And the idea that any of them would get nuclear weapons is so potentially disturbing to world peace that it's worth at least considering what the realistic options are. If Iran does develop a nuclear arsenal, it will change everything in the Middle East. It will change everything in the world. And remember, because Iran is a theocracy, which bases its decisions on the leaders of the Ayatollah, a kind of cataclysmic approach, which focuses more on the world to come than on this world, is not beyond the realm of dispute. And the question is, a question of probabilities. Nobody knows for absolute certain. Nobody knows with any degree of prophecy. You know, the Bible says that, or the Talmud says the prophecy ended with the destruction of the Second Temple. And so we're left with a world of probability.
Okay, that's really weird that you're bringing a religious statement into a geopolitical debate. Well, the Talmud said that, you know, prophecy ended with the Second Temple. What has that got to do with the what? You're basically saying we can't predict future events because the Talmud said. Are you serious right now? Okay, I don't know why the Talmud was suddenly brought up. I've got no idea. It's really weird though. And you're sort of using a what if sort of thing. It's like a slippery slope fallacy. It's what if Iran continues to develop? What if they get a nuclear? What if they send it to one of their proxies? What like this is a slippery slope fallacy. You're sort of outlining these probabilities, stacking them and saying, oh, well, it's highly probable, but it's not. All of these probabilities are very, very small. So you can't say, hey, that is what will happen. And then you go to, but we don't know what will happen because Talmud? What the hell? Weird. That's so weird. I also notice he's wearing like the Star of David on his socks. So he's definitely on the Israel side. I get that. I'm hesitant to support Israel in the light of their actions in the Gaza Strip recently. I'm sorry. I'm not against Jewish people. I'm not against the Israeli people, but the Israeli government have, according to the International Committee on Human Rights, have committed human rights violations in the Gaza Strip. That is a fact. And in my opinion, I don't see when anybody who is representing Israel is saying we need a preemptive strike, that I can take them particularly seriously. Oh no, he is Jewish, Robin. He's absolutely Jewish. His name's Dershowitz. I mean, yeah, he is Jewish, sure.
And one has to ask what the worst probabilities are, and the question is, what would be worse, a preventive attack on a nascent Iranian a nuclear arsenal, or leaving it alone and allowing Iran to develop?
Okay, so this is a faulty argument, because you can sort of go, oh well, if you're going to make decisions on worst case outcomes, you wouldn't leave your house. You know, like, why drive a car? Because the worst case outcome is you get killed in a car crash, kind of thing. That isn't a good argument, because you're basically taking a slippery slope. Like, well, if I drive, I might be distracted. If I'm distracted, all of these things might happen, yes. But we cannot base our actions upon these worst case scenarios, because we will always be doing things that are extreme, based upon what is possibly a tiny probability of something happening.
Nuclear arsenal, which would change everything in the Middle East. You know, we heard my distinguished opponent talk about how many times Israel thought about bombing Iran, but they've never done it. They've never done it, not because they didn't have the capacity to do it, but they were waiting for a much higher level of certainty and a much higher ability to do to Iran what they did to Iraq and Syria, and that is to destroy the nuclear potential without endangering civilians. For example, in Iraq, I think one civilian died, an Egyptian who was not, I'm sorry, a French technician who was not supposed to be at the Osiris reactor. It was on a Saturday or something like that, or a Friday, when they were supposed to be home, and accidentally he was there. And if it didn't totally destroy, it set back the Iraqi nuclear program for many years. In fact, it's never been renewed again. And so,
well, that's not what you were saying about invading Iraq, or it's not what the people that were saying Iraq had, is it? It was weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. I don't know what his stance was about the invasion of Iraq. I would be very disappointed if he supported it. Yeah, I think he actually supported the war. Yeah, so he kind of supported the war in Iraq, which is horrible. That's horrible. Like, so why is this not Iraq all over again? Like, why is this different? I don't know.
So it is a question of probabilities, and yes, I favor regime change in Iran. Iran
Wow. Yeah. Well, sure. Like I think I would favor regime change as well. However, I wouldn't be going like attacking that nation in order to make it happen. That's the difference.
is the most dangerous country in the modern world. It is the modern day Nazi Germany. And
I don't know about that one, champ. I think America might be the most dangerous country in the world. If America, this is the thing, or China, like I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's true in the slightest. I really refute that. I think that America's probably the most dangerous. Like the most dangerous from your perspective, maybe. Like if you're saying, hey, I'm standing with Israel and it's the most dangerous to Israel, then yeah, sure, that could well be true. But I think if you're a average person in Iraq circa 2000, like America is the most dangerous to you. I'm really sorry, but that's the truth. I think that's a matter of perspective, which is the most dangerous.
the potential for Iran using its aggressive behavior, which it now assigns to surrogates, and doing it in a more direct, effective way. Remember that Iran sent hundreds of missiles to Israel just a few weeks ago. Imagine if a half a dozen of them were nuclear tipped. Every country has the right of self-defense, and regime change would be good for the vast majority of Iranians want regime change. The only reason there is Ayatollah regime in Iran is because it's a despotic regime.
Yes.
It's the furthest thing in the world from
true.
democracy. And so
that's true. That is true. The only reason they're there is because they're a totalitarian regime, sure. But part of the reason why they continue their totalitarian regime is because the people are scared of the US. That's part of the reason. That's part of the reason. They're petrified of the US and of Israel. And I can't say I blame them. You're talking about a precision strike with low casualties against this country. Like it's just, something you do on a Sunday if they seem to be developing any nuclear capabilities.
The Iranian regime could be changed. Look, I don't want the Shah. I don't want anybody close to the Shah to be the leader of Iran. But you have to choose between evils, and you have to choose the lesser of the evils. And I have to tell you, the Iranian regime was less bad on a scale of really bad under the Shah of Iran, and it would be much, much less bad under his far more liberal and far more accommodating son than it would have been under the Ayatollahs. So, we don't.
How do you know that son will be more accommodating to the people? How do you know? Because he tells you so? Because he says he will? I hate to break it to you, champ, but it really it really seems like you're going, oh, well, this son, he's way better than his father. How do you know that? How do you know that the son of the Shah will be any better than his father? He's never been in power.
don't live in a world of good, better, best. We live in a world of bad, worse, worser, worsest, and intolerable. And all I'm trying to do is move it from intolerable to not so bad.
Okay, stop. This is the problem, because your list is for you, like, and what you want. The people, you're basically saying, hey, these people are bad. I will give you something else that they might not want. That the people of Iran may see a American Shah puppet as being the worst that could ever be. Like, you are ignoring how bad it was under the Shah the first time America did this. The first time. And you haven't learnt a damn thing. The Iranian people do not want somebody who's friendly to the US in there. It's going to take repair and understanding and helping them and coming to agreements. It's going to take diplomacy, not warfare, to repair what has happened in Iran. I'm really sorry, that's what it's going to take. And we set out towards that, and you just are ignoring that completely. You just want to attack them and put in who you think they should have. That hasn't worked. It didn't work in Iraq, didn't work in Syria, it didn't work in Iran the first time. I don't know how it's going to work this time. I don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like, what makes you think this is going to be any different than the other failures around the world?
And that's the risk that would be incurred if the United States were to take a preventive action. And I think in the end, when you think about what the world would look like if the United States didn't and Israel together didn't take preventive action, and if Iran were to develop a nuclear arsenal, which it would then allocate to its even less responsible surrogates, such as Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, or a world in which Iran were deprived.
Okay, do you hear the slippery slope here? If Iran develops a nuclear arsenal, if they give it to these people, if there's a lot of ifs in here, and we're basing our actions towards Iran on fear, like this fear of what they could do, not what they're actually doing. And like, I get it. Iran is a scary, and a lot of it's been amped up. It's a scary regime. It's a unfair regime. I get that. I get all of it. We can't let this fear of what ifs actually dictate what we do, because that is the same thing that led to Iraq. It's the same thing that led to, this fear of weapons of mass destruction is what led to Iraq, because the people, they were told, oh, he has these weapons, he could strike us, he could strike Israel, he could strike all these people, he's a killer, he needs to be taken out. And that's what led to Iraq, this fear. And they preyed upon the fear that happened. And the fear was justified after 9/11. It was a horrendous terrorist attack of the like we have never seen before. But they used that fear to make us take actions that we'd never ordinarily agree to. And Dershowitz is doing the same. Think about what happens if this happens. Yeah, it's scary, but we can't let that stop us from taking rational actions that are based upon what we actually think is the correct way to act in these circumstances. And as Greenwald has pointed out, the world becomes a lot less dangerous when we take these diplomatic actions with states like Iran to monitor and bring them into the international community rather than ostracize them.
Of the ability to create a nuclear arsenal. And it's a hard question. I disagree with the opening statement of my distinguished opponent that this is not a hard question. It is a very hard question. And I hope and pray we don't ever become in a situation like occurred after Nazi Germany, where we regret not having taken action. In Nazi Germany, we had enough information and we learned to regret, and it cost millions and millions and millions of lives.
Well, I mean, Iran is not Nazi Germany. It's not doesn't have the capacity of the sort of the Rhineland and the production capacities. And the only reason Germany became such a huge problem was because of the sales of ammunition to it, as I pointed out. So I really dislike this analogy. Anytime somebody wants to make you afraid of somebody, they're like, oh, they're like a Nazi or like Hitler. I don't think that is comparable here.
Hope we never get to that situation where we look back at this debate and we regret not having taken the action that I advocate we should take.
So one of the first things that I noticed Professor Dershowitz saying near the beginning of his rebuttal there was, well, it would be nice to have an agreement with Iran, but unfortunately, it will never happen. And I thought that was so odd because it actually did happen, not 100 years ago, but 7 years ago. It was the Iran deal that the United States and Western Europe entered into with Iran to reintegrate Iran into the international community in exchange for Iran opening up its nuclear facilities. Yes. Think about what you would think if you were a leader. Would you want nuclear weapons more if you felt like you were in danger of being bombed and attacked and having people like Alan Dershowitz talking for the last 20 years about how important it is to bomb you within the next few weeks? Wouldn't you think, oh, I better get nuclear weapons? And wouldn't you feel like maybe you don't need nuclear weapons if you're actually entering deals that you don't renege on, but that the United States did? So that was
keep in mind that it was not Iran that went, no, we're not doing this anymore. It was the United States that did that under Trump. It was the United States that reneged on that deal, that broke their agreement. Iran did everything right under that deal. Everything. There was not one thing that they reneged on. It was the US that broke it. And that's the problem.
Deal. And I read you the Congressional Service Report that said during the time of that deal, there was no movement at all on Iran's nuclear program. In fact, this is from the Brookings Institution, which supported the war in Iraq, has always supported multiple wars in the Middle East. And this is what they say in December 2021, why bombing Iran is still a bad idea. Quote, retired Israeli General Isaac Ben Israel told Bloomberg that, quote, Netanyahu's efforts to persuade the Trump administration to quit the nuclear agreement with Iran has turned out to be the worst strategic mistake in Israel's history. With this statement, General Ben Israel admitted that not only did Israel undermine its own security by pushing for Trump to renege on the agreement, but also that Israel undermined America's security, as both countries share an interest in preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Such behavior is unacceptable from a partner. Unfortunately, Iran's current minister, Naftali Bennett, is adopting much of the same posture on Iran as Netanyahu. And here's what they say will happen if you vote for bombing Iran. Quote, an Israeli strike on Iran or a U.S. strike on Iran, quote, will likely start a conflict that pulls in neighboring countries on both sides. Hezbollah will launch thousands of rockets, missiles, and drones at Haifa, Tel Aviv, and other targets. Hamas might also join the conflict. Iran or its Iraqi and Yemeni partners could strike Saudi Arabia as they have in the past. They might also expand attacks to include Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, given their now publicly normalized ties with Israel. Oman, Kuwait, and Qatar, which have tended to maintain relations with both Israel and the rest of the United States, will be pressed to choose a side, a decision that will subject them to attack from their new adversaries. Jordan would be in a grave bind given the enormous popular pressure to break the peace treaty with Israel. Oil prices would skyrocket.
Yeah, so he's taking the statements of an Israeli former general, like somebody from Israel who has a keen understanding of geopolitical moves in the area. And so Netanyahu is pushing for war with Iran. Like he really hates Iran. And that's why I can't, the Israeli politicians, I mean, they're even getting protests from their own people over their attitudes towards the rest of the Middle East. And the cancellation of that Iran deal was catastrophic for the trust. Like we had made steps, and what makes me upset is the amount of work that went into getting Iran to trust that we would do the inspections and lift sanctions and uphold our end of that deal. Like the trust that was there is so hard to get. It's so hard to broker with a belligerent country. And they worked really hard at it. And then America broke it. Just horrible.
Does that sound like something we all want? This conflagration in the Middle East of the kind we saw when the people who said the same thing about Iraq got their way? Now, again, Professor Dershowitz returned to this idea that, oh, the Iranians are Nazis. I guess, I don't know if Assad is still the new Hitler. I don't know if Gaddafi's still the new Hitler, if Mohammad
Saddam Hussein was the Hitler. Like all of these people, they've always used, well, what about World War II to justify invasions of their countries? It's not, we can't keep using, you know, a threat of this one horrendous person in history to describe everybody that they disagree with. We just can't, we have to stop doing it.
Who was not even part of Iran's government anymore, is the new Hitler. I don't know if Putin is the new Hitler, but Iran, he says, is the real new Nazis, and you have to treat them that way. What evidence is there that Iran is some crazy apocalyptic country that goes around murdering and slaughtering and committing genocide? They have certainly done bad acts, and Professor Dershowitz went over them. But the death count responsible that the United States and Israel is responsible for dwarfs whatever number of people Iran has killed. Iran has shown over and over that they can be rationally negotiated with. They're not some crazed apocalyptic cult. When Israel bombed their embassy in Syria, they didn't go all out and try and attack Israel the way many countries would. They used some of their slowest and most harmless drones that they knew would be intercepted as a show of symbolic force. There's no evidence that Iran is out there invading other countries, bombing other countries, trying to bring a genocide or a new Holocaust. In fact, in 2018, there was a UN General Assembly resolution that simply called for the, quote, establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the region of the Middle East. All 171 countries voted in favor of a nuclear-free Middle East. You'll never guess which were the only two no votes in the entire world.
I'm guessing that it was Israel and the United States. So he's talking about the United Nations voting on having the Middle East as a nuclear-free zone. And who were the no votes in the United Nations?
Oh, it's the US and Israel.
Yep.
That's who voted no on a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East.
So think about that. The United Nations as a community of the world put up a vote on whether there should be a resolution that the Middle East should be a nuclear-free zone. Like no nuclear weapons in the Middle East at all. The only two dissenting votes, and America has a veto power as well as the other big five countries like France, England, USSR, or you know, Russia. And the only two dissenting votes was Israel and the United States. That is insane. Like, that's insane. I think that any move towards nuclear proliferation is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So while they're checking Iran to make sure that they don't have any nuclear weapons, they're basically defending the right for countries in the area to have nuclear weapons. And more importantly, Israel to have nuclear weapons.
Now, one of the things that I think we need to ask ourselves is what would be the effect of bombing Iran versus what would be the effect of returning to something like the Iran deal. Here's the Brookings Institute in December of 21 again. Quote, while the talks in Vienna to restore the new Iran deal yielded little progress, this appeal marks just the latest example of the failed paradigm with which both the United States and Israel have approached Iran, the belief that greater pressure and more aggression will force Tehran to capitulate when the likelier outcome would be to provoke a similar military response. That has been the mistake of U.S. foreign policy for 50 years.
Yeah, you could sum up the U.S. policy for 50 years. For, you know, if we just make more military actions, you know, hit them harder, they're going to roll over and die. Like, look at Vietnam. They thought that if they just put enough pressure on Vietnam, they would capitulate. And they never would. They never would. Booba, do you believe that any of them... Hang on a second. I got to read this. Do you think any of the militant group Iran funds, trains, and backs wouldn't try to get their hands on a nuclear weapon through North Korea if Israel came up as a nuclear deterrent? Yeah, but I mean, North Korea doesn't really play well with anybody, Booba. I don't think they could. That's a really weird question. because the question isn't whether they're trying to get their hands on a nuclear weapon. Their question is would Iran give them one? That's the question. There's no nuclear program in Iran at the moment that we can tell. They're using their nuclear reserves for their power plants. I don't know, there's no credible evidence that they have a nuclear weapon program or any weapon of mass destruction program, Booba. North Korea certainly does. We know that absolutely they certainly do. But would North Korea give that to one of the sort of Islamic fundamentalist groups? I highly doubt it. I highly doubt they would do that, because they don't like fundamentalist regime. Well, the only fundamentalist regime that North Korea likes is North Korea. Like, let's face it, they're very, very insular that way.
We believe we can throw our military force around the world and force countries to immediately capitulate and submit. And instead, the exact opposite happens in war after war. We make the planet more dangerous. We incentivize countries to try and build up their military and acquire nuclear weapons to protect against that kind of single-handed aggression. Now, I cited, and he didn't even note, let alone respond to, the studies that show that after the 1981 strike by Israel on Iraq's nuclear weapons program, the model that he always likes to cite, it did not deter Iraq's nuclear program. To the contrary, it supercharged it. They quadrupled or more the amount of money they were spending to acquire nuclear weapons, precisely because Israel had just attacked them. And in fact, there was, by 2003, the key Iraqi nuclear scientist who were called the father of the nuclear program, who was imprisoned by Saddam during the 1981 bombing of Israel. He was in prison, and Saddam immediately let him out.
Yeah, I believe that trade is like mining and it's a trade agreement for mining and like commercial good trade. I don't think it is sort of weapons trading. I don't think so. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I don't think it's a weapons trading. Like, I think it's a more commercial trading.
After the Israeli bombing, because they realized that they needed to build up their nuclear arsenal. A CIA 2004 report on weapons of mass destruction said this, quote, according to a former senior official, Israel's bombing of Iraq's nuclear reactor spurred Saddam to build up Iraq's military to confront Israel in the early 1980s. Saudi Arabia gave $5 billion after the Israeli attack to Iraq under the promise that if Iraq develops nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia would get those too. It supercharged the craving desire of the Middle East when Israel bombed for them to get nuclear weapons. It did not bring any peace or deter them at all. And I would just...
Yeah, no, but there's a big difference between sort of, just Soviet weapons and nuclear weapons.
Leave you with this quote from a very conservative former senator who became Donald Trump's director of national intelligence, Stan Coates, who in 2017 was asked about why North Korea was insisting on having the nuclear bomb. And he said this: there is rationale backing Kim Jong-un's actions, which are survival for his regime, survival for his country. And he has watched, I think, what has happened around the world relative to nations that possess nuclear capabilities and the leverage they have, and seen that having the nuclear part in your pocket results in a lot of deterrence. The lessons that we learned out of Libya giving up its nukes and Ukraine giving up its nukes, and also obviously Iraq giving up its nukes, is unfortunately, if you had nukes, never give them up. If you don't have them, get them. That is the world that has been created by the Alan Dershowitzes of the world, by the people who want the U.S. to constantly bomb other countries. We have created the world in which countries need nuclear weapons.
Right. So it's kind of like a selection or an evolution kind of thing, like survival of the fittest. If you have nukes, you don't get invaded. If you have nukes, you don't get invaded. If you give them up or you don't have them, you get invaded. If America doesn't like you, that has led to all of them getting nuclear weapons, because that's the only thing that deters the United States from coming in and changing who your government is. Like, don't ever forget that the United States overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran. It's hard to hear, I know, but that is the reality of the situation. And I can't say that Iran isn't going to, make nuclear weapons. I can't say that. I don't know. but this whole idea of attack them because at some future point they could, I don't know if that's enough of a reason, especially after Iraq. Especially after Iraq.
And the proof that we can fix it with cooperation is the Iran deal that was working perfectly, as everyone says, to keep Iran out of the nuclear arms business.
Yeah. And that's the that Iran deal was working, and it was cancelled, which is so depressing. You know, it's so helpful. Yeah, no, I've wondered that as well. And I wonder if Trump looks at the ANZUS treaty like he looks at the NATO treaty. Like, we're not part of NATO, but he doesn't think he gets a bang for his buck from NATO. So will Trump actually consider the ANZUS treaty to be worth it? I highly doubt it. But if the ANZUS treaty goes down, we throw out but certain bases in Australia that I mentioned earlier, like Pine Gap, like the base in Darwin. Like, Trump doesn't understand what's going on with the alliance with Australia, that how necessary it is to have us there, like monitoring China, basically. He just doesn't understand in the slightest. Like, oh, we have all this military. What do you bring to the table? Well, we do. That's the thing. It's just you don't understand what we do. It's very, very... But yeah, you can say goodbye to Pine Gap. You can say, because people already don't like American bases in Australia. If he breaks ANZUS, people will go nuts in Australia. Like, people will toss American bases out of Australia. There's no doubt about it. The only reason we put up with American bases in Australia is because we have a treaty with America that states that they can do that. That's the only reason we put up with it. And, you know, we never forget what the US did for us in World War II. We won't forget that. That is why Australia is such strong allies of America. But, you know, we're not going to go into another... I don't think Australia will go into another offensive war. You know, this coalition of the willing, we were culpable in that. We were absolutely culpable in being part of the coalition of the willing. France wasn't, and look what happened to France. France has been vilified by the US ever since. Ever since they said, no, we're not going to support attacking Iraq. We're going to speak out against it. And suddenly, you know, people are changing French fries to freedom fries. The French were right. The French were correct. It was an unjustified war that caused the deaths of millions of people. They were right. But still the French are sort of vilified in the US. It's crazy. I might call it here. I know it's a bit of a different debate. Usually I'm doing sort of, you know, religious debates or theocratic debates, theology. Does anybody want to see this? The second part of it is a Q&A and then there's summation. But I was wondering, does anyone want to see... you want to see part 2 of this? Well, that's true, Titan, but, you know, not to the point of changing French fries into freedom fries. Like, seriously. Like, you seriously look back at these events that we lived through, and I know Titan's old enough to be with me on this one, but they do seem like parody looking back on them. You know, that the French didn't support the invasion of Iraq, so we're going to change French fries to freedom fries. Like, it does seem like, you know, it seemed, if you saw that on Saturday Night Live, it would be, you know, well, yeah, it was a Fox News thing, but it did, like, this is the thing, Booba, it was really large, it was huge. It sort of, you know, people did vilify the French at that point. People definitely did. And, you know, it kind of, you know, I know, Robin, I'm sorry. I just wanted to give, you know, a neutral answer. And it's okay if you don't. It's okay. It's a very, very hard subject to discuss, and it's very complicated. I get that. But I think it's something that needs to be talked about. And I think that if we could show that Iran was developing nuclear capabilities and they were, you know, sort of looking to launch something, or if they had given it to one of the if we could show with reason, like, you know, good evidence that they had given it to Hezbollah or Hamas or one of these terrorist sort of organizations, my position would be different. It would be absolutely different. Oh yeah, they did, boo, but like, imports of French wine were cancelled and some stuff like that. Like look it up. It basically opposition to Iraq war cost French wine about $112 million in revenue because people were canceling their orders of French wine. Like, none of this is sort of like, you personally may not have seen it too much, but, you know, when you're talking about vilifying people and stopping their imports, even if not everybody does it, it still will have a massive impact on you know, the country selling those things. Like, if you decide to boycott coal, for instance, it's going to have a huge impact on Australia, which I think should happen. I don't think we should be selling coal because it's so bad for the environment, but we do. You know, it still had a massive impact on it. Oh yeah, you did send me an SNL sketch that was banned in my country. I got to get a VPN or something. I do, but that's okay. And so, yeah, this is very, very contentious. But the yeses have it. I'll see if Ember does want to do it. I don't know whether she is back this week. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, I might do it. I might not. It's kind of depressing, to be honest with you. It's really depressing. And I misspelt no, which is hilarious. But yeah, I think this is a good time to leave it because I'm about halfway through. But and plus the Q&A and the sort of summations are never as good as the meat, which is the introductions and the sort of the rebuttals are what gets me. And I think, for my money, Greenwald had a much stronger position, right? He basically has said, like, instead of saying, hey, what could happen, and all of these ifs, he said, let's look at where this action has taken us into the past, especially where those actions have taken us in the past in that region against exactly these type of countries. And I think he's on a much stronger position because Iraq was, like, I hate to keep going back to it, it was sad for me. It was sad to see something like 70% of the population be against a war, protest the war, and we're still involved in it. That's what got me. Like, how can so many people in a democracy be against something and your country does it anyway and then says, oops, mistake, my bad? Like, how can that be possible? It's very, very disheartening to live in a democracy, to use your voice in a protest, and it still happens. And we are not safer for having invaded Iraq. We're actually in much worse a position because that gave rise to ISIS. We're in a way worse position. So I completely disagree with Dershowitz. I think he is looking for what's in the best interests of Netanyahu and Israel, rather than what's in the best interests of the world. That's what I think. I think he isn't looking at this from what is the best internationally for the world and for the global community that we're in. He is looking at it from what's best for Israel. And look, if he's Jewish, I get that. I get that's his perspective, but I don't think that that is a good idea. I think that his willingness to back what Netanyahu wants is blinding him to what is best. I don't know. If Iran could be shown to have developed weapons and has the intention of using them, perhaps I would change my mind. I think maybe I would change my mind, but I don't think that has happened. And more to the fact that I don't really like, they said that about Iraq and there was no credible evidence. It would have to be credible, not just, somebody say so, not just some random, I think they blamed it on some British spy somewhere that sort of said that Iraq had weapons of mass. No, it needs to be from a credible source. It needs to be somewhere that is absolutely credible. But I don't know why we're even. All I can do is see this from, if you're an average Iranian people and you hear a discussion about should we bomb your country, I think of it this way: you're sitting in the US or Australia or whatever, and you see a debate whether Iran's having on whether they should bomb somebody or bomb your country, right? It makes you very anxious. So I don't like it. Yeah, Colin Powell. I don't think Colin Powell was a bad guy. I think he was just given incorrect information, and I think that I can't remember the guy's name. Who was behind it all? The ex-Halliburton CEO that shot his friend. Dick Cheney was the real monster behind that. He was the one really pushing for it. Like, he was really pushing for invade Iraq. So I think all in all, I think no, I do too, Beheaded Cam. I feel bad for our Iranian friends as well. And as I said, I know Iranian people who fled from the regime change in Iran, that they're perfectly reasonable people. They're perfectly nice people. They're really nice. They're cool. They just don't want to go back there because there used to be a democracy. There's not anymore. And unfortunately, that the US caused that. But that was their policy back then in sort of the 60s and early 70s. Their policy was, if you don't like what a country's doing, change who's in charge of the country. That was their policy. And I think that we underestimate just how much damage that has done. Like, it's caused no end of damage, and we've got to stop doing it. But it upsets me that Dershowitz is just suggesting the same thing again. Same thing again. But thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget, do something fun, do something for yourself. It's been very worrying and it's very, very contentious and very stressful. I know that. And so do something for yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to each other. Don't forget to hit like and share if you do want somebody to see it. It helped me out a great deal. But do take care, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.